The spoon clinked against the crystal flute, a piercing sound that silenced the grand ballroom. My mother-in-law, Deborah, offered a benevolent smile to our table. And a special thank you to my wonderful daughter-in-law, Elena, who has graciously offered to cover tonight's $1,694 table donation. Every eye turned to me. 3 years ago, I would have panicked. Tonight, I didn't flinch. I just looked at her, feeling a cold, mathematical clarity settle over my mind. Have you ever been the one who was expected to pay for everyone else's entitlement? Drop a comment and tell me your story. I'm reading every single one. I am a data analyst. My entire professional life is built on finding patterns in chaos, identifying anomalies, and balancing ledgers. Numbers do not lie. They do not manipulate, and they certainly do not gaslight you. But for 3 years, I had allowed my personal life to become a bad dataset. I had been married to Brad for exactly 36 months. In that time, I became the silent investor in their version of family. It started small, picking up the tab for Sunday dinners, covering the emergency repair on Deborah's luxury sedan, paying for the country club renewals because Brad's bonus was supposedly delayed. For a long time, people wondered why I stayed silent, why I kept writing the checks and balancing their overflowing ledgers. It is a psychological trap, the invisible chain of the survivor that binds you to the very people draining you dry. You endure because you are told that this is what family does. You are conditioned to believe that your compliance is the rent you pay for belonging. It is learned helplessness, a prison without bars, where your own sense of duty is weaponized against you. I hadn't been weak. I had been surviving an environment that constantly demanded I prove my worth through my wallet. But survival is a short-term strategy, not a long-term investment. My own life was strictly disciplined. I woke up at 6 every morning, managed my portfolio, and budgeted meticulously. But Brad and Deborah lived in a whirlwind of manufactured emergencies and grand social expectations. Let me explain how the gaslighting worked. If I asked why Brad's savings account was suddenly depleted, Deborah would sigh, her voice dripping with maternal disappointment, and say I didn't understand the pressures of his career. If I pointed out that my paycheck was floating their entire household, Brad would kiss my forehead and tell me we were building a future together. But the future we were building was entirely in my name, with their liabilities attached. They didn't see me as a partner. I was a subscription service, and they were footing the bill to my account with auto-renew turned on permanently. I had convinced myself that maintaining the peace was cheaper than confronting the reality. I accepted the quiet humiliation of being the family ATM because confronting the truth felt like admitting I had failed at building a family. But the invisible chain snapped the moment I realized they weren't shocked by what they were doing. They were entirely comfortable with my exhaustion. I stopped trying to find affection in a business transaction. I opened my laptop, pulled my own credit reports, and started the audit. Deborah Hayes was a woman who traded in the currency of public perception. She sat on the board of 3 local charities, hosted silent auctions, and never missed a gala. To the outside world, she was a selfless benefactor, a pillar of high society who gave endlessly to the less fortunate. But data is impartial, and the data told a very different story. When you look closely at someone desperate to project wealth, you often find a terrifying void. It is the illusion of power from an empty wallet. People like Deborah do not give to charity to help others. They use charity as a stage to elevate themselves. They rent their social status, using philanthropy to buy proximity to power. When their own resources dry up, they do not step down from the stage. Instead, they find a sponsor to bleed dry. Because to lose their status wouldn't just mean losing money, it would mean losing their entire identity. Their facade of wealth is just a hollow shell, and they will cannibalize anyone close to them to keep that shell intact. That sponsor was me. For 3 years, I had been funding Deborah's philanthropic illusions. The $5,000 platinum table at the spring gala, paid for by my end-of-year bonus. The catered luncheons for her charity committee, billed directly to my secondary credit card. She would host these lavish events, clinking champagne glasses with the city's elite, accepting their praise for her generosity, while I quietly transferred funds from my savings to cover the overdrafts. Brad always defended her. He would adjust his expensive tie and say that his mother's charity work opened doors for us. But the only doors being opened were the ones to my bank accounts. There was no return on investment. The charity events were nothing more than exclusive parties for Deborah's wealthy friends, entirely subsidized by a daughter-in-law she treated like a nuisance. She paraded around in designer gowns, acting like the matriarch of an empire, while quietly slipping me the invoices under the table. She loved the applause, but she despised the cost. So she simply outsourced the cost to me. I had been analyzing her spending for weeks leading up to tonight's gala. I tracked every dollar she had donated over the past 36 months. Not a single cent had come from her own accounts. The grand philanthropist was functionally bankrupt, operating on a deficit of both funds and morality. I watched her laugh with a local politician, her posture straight, her confidence absolute. She felt untouchable. But the problem with building a life on someone else's ledger is that the accountant eventually audits the books. And when they do, the illusion collapses. The true scope of their financial parasitism wasn't fully revealed to me until 2 weeks before the gala. I had been doing a routine check of my credit score when I noticed a catastrophic anomaly, a massive drop. I didn't panic, I didn't cry, I didn't ask why. I simply poured a cup of black coffee, sat at my desk, and traced the data. There it was, a secondary mortgage, bleeding red across my financial history. An upscale downtown apartment had been purchased 12 months ago. The deed and the debt were entirely in my name. The signatures had been forged, the documentation perfectly manipulated. Deborah had used my pristine credit to buy herself a luxury investment property, and Brad, my husband, my supposed partner, had provided her with all my necessary personal documents to make it happen. They had saddled me with a debt of over $400,000, defaulting on the payments to cover their lifestyle. This wasn't just gaslighting anymore. This was a felony. I didn't confront them. I didn't scream or throw plates or demand an explanation. Emotional confrontations are sloppy. They give the opposition time to formulate lies, to destroy evidence, to manipulate the narrative. I had zero interest in their excuses. This wasn't revenge. It was accounting. I needed absolute, undeniable proof, and I needed to execute the closure of this account with surgical precision. I called Walter. Walter wasn't just a friend. He was a forensic accountant and a fiercely sharp legal mind. I handed over the fraudulent mortgage documents, the forged signatures, and the 3 years of bank statements showing the systematic draining of my assets. Walter didn't offer pity. He offered a strategy. Together, we built the digital ledger. I spent the next 14 days quietly redirecting my life. I opened new, secure accounts at a different bank. I froze the credit lines they had been using. I meticulously gathered every receipt, every fraudulent document, every transfer confirmation, and compiled them into a single, undeniable presentation file. I smiled at Brad over dinner. I helped Deborah select her gown for the charity gala. I played the role of the compliant, oblivious cash cow flawlessly. I removed my personal belongings from our shared home, piece by piece, under the guise of organizing a spring clean, transferring everything into a secure private storage unit across town. I secured a new lease on a high-security apartment across town. Every step was calculated, cold, and entirely devoid of hesitation. When the night of the gala finally arrived, I dressed in a sharp, tailored black suit. I wasn't dressing for a celebration. I was dressing for a boardroom execution. My laptop, containing the digital ledger, was safely tucked into my sleek leather briefcase, which I handed to the AV technician at the venue with very specific instructions and a generous tip. It was a calculated risk, but in a world where I had managed their finances for years, the AV team was more than happy to follow the instructions of the woman who technically paid their corporate accounts. The trap was set. All that was left was for them to walk right into it. Which brings us back to the stillness of the gala. The applause from Deborah's announcement faded, leaving a heavy, expectant silence at our table. The waiter, dressed in a crisp white tuxedo jacket, approached my chair. He held out the polished silver tray bearing the leather billfold and the wireless payment terminal. $1,694. Brad leaned over, whispering in my ear with that familiar, patronizing tone. "Just put it on the joint platinum card," he said, promising he would transfer the funds on Monday. I knew he wouldn't. There were no funds to transfer. I looked at Deborah, who was already turning her attention back to the society photographer hovering nearby. She had played her card. Now, it was time to play mine. I had deliberately kept the account active until this exact moment, ensuring the transaction would be the final, undeniable proof of their fraud on the ledger. They needed to feel the temporary relief of a successful order before the system I built would trigger the total collapse. Without breaking eye contact with my husband, I reached into my clutch. I pulled out the joint platinum card, the one they had been living off for years, and placed it on the silver tray. The waiter smiled politely, inserted the chip into the machine, and waited. 3 seconds passed. Then came the sound, a short, flat, indifferent beep. "I apologize, madam," the waiter murmured, his professional discretion kicking in. "It seems this card has been declined." The conversation at our immediate table stopped. The politician Deborah had been entertaining raised an eyebrow. Deborah's head snapped toward me, her perfect smile freezing into a mask of brittle panic. "Try it again," Brad hissed, his face flushing red. "It's a glitch! The limit is over 50,000. "The limit was over 50,000, I corrected him, my voice perfectly level and loud enough to carry, before I cancelled the account yesterday. Brad stared at me, uncomprehending. He demanded I give the man my other card and stop causing a scene. "I don't have another card for you, Brad," I said, "and I am not causing a scene. I am simply declining a transaction. I refuse to authorize payment." Deborah hissed my name, her voice a venomous whisper as she leaned across the table, ordering me to pay the bill immediately so I wouldn't embarrass them. "I cannot pay with funds I do not have," I replied smoothly. "Perhaps you should use the rental income from the downtown apartment you bought in my name. The one with the forged signatures." The blood drained from Brad's face. Deborah's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The politician beside her slowly pushed his chair back, sensing the impending detonation. Brad stammered, looking around frantically as nearby tables began to stare. He begged to handle it at home and just pay the waiter. "I am not paying the waiter," I said, folding my hands neatly on my lap. "You ordered the champagne, Deborah. You hosted the table. The bill belongs to you." The waiter cleared his throat, looking directly at Deborah to ask how she would like to settle the balance. Deborah fumbled for her purse, her hands shaking violently. She pulled out a gold card and shoved it at the waiter. 10 seconds later, the machine produced the exact same short, flat, indifferent beep. Declined. They weren't shocked by what they had done. They were shocked that I had stopped playing along. The power dynamic had flipped in an instant, and there was no going back. The murmurs in the ballroom were no longer polite whispers. They were a rising tide of blatant shock. But a declined credit card was only a minor accounting error. I was there to present the full financial report. I pulled out my phone and sent a single, one-word text to Walter, who was standing by the AV booth at the back of the room. "Execute." Instantly, the soft jazz playing over the ballroom, speakers cut out. The massive projection screens framing the main stage, which had been cycling through photos of Deborah's supposed charity work, suddenly went black. A moment later, a massive high-definition spreadsheet illuminated the room. My digital ledger was now on public display for 400 of the city's wealthiest and most influential citizens. Deborah shrieked, standing up so fast her chair tipped backward. She screamed for security to turn it off. The first slide displayed a side-by-side comparison. On the left, the public records of Deborah's generous donations to the Gala's foundation over the past 3 years. On the right, the bank transfer records proving that every single dollar had been systematically siphoned from my personal accounts. Red circles highlighted the discrepancies in the signature, backed by the initial findings of the forensic team now leading the official criminal investigation. The screens transitioned. They didn't show private social security numbers that would be beneath me, but rather the formal criminal complaint filed with the district attorney's office, clearly highlighting the charges of identity theft and wire fraud against the Hayes family. The entire ballroom was deadly silent, bathed in the glow of undeniable criminal evidence. Brad yelled that it was a lie, his voice cracking with panic. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a desperate, pathetic terror, begging me to turn it off. "I can't," I said coldly. "It's an automated presentation, just like your automated withdrawals from my savings." The final slide appeared. It was a formal notice of legal action, drafted by Walter's firm, listing charges of identity theft, wire fraud, and grand larceny, naming both Deborah and Bradley Hayes. Deborah collapsed into her chair, her face buried in her hands. The mask had completely shattered. The ballroom erupted in a wave of hushed whispers. The elite society she had courted. They didn't scream. They simply drew back, creating a physical and social distance between themselves and the scandal, as if trying to shield their own reputations from the fallout. She was no longer a benefactor. She was a fraud, a thief, and a criminal exposed in high definition. Brad stared at the screen, and then at his mother. The illusion he had maintained that his mother was a saint and I was just being difficult was obliterated by raw data. He looked back at me, finally seeing the reality of the woman he had underestimated. I stood up, adjusting my jacket. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply picked up my clutch. "The authorities have already received this file," I said to them, my voice carrying in the quiet room. "My lawyer will contact you regarding the divorce and the restitution. Do not attempt to contact me." I turned and walked out of the ballroom. Behind me, the digital ledger remained on the screens, a glowing monument to their complete and utter destruction. By the time the gala ended, I was already standing in my new apartment, watching the city lights from a secure, high-rise balcony. I had separated my life entirely from the wreckage. My old keys were left on the counter of our former home. My phone number was changed, the divorce proceedings were filed, and the criminal investigation was fully underway. The following weeks were quiet. There were no more manufactured emergencies, no more mysterious overdrafts, no more walking on eggshells around a family that viewed me as a utility. Brad and Deborah were facing federal charges and complete social exile. They had built their lives on a foundation of entitlement and theft. And when the foundation crumbled, they had nothing left to stand on. I realized then that the most dangerous thing you can be in a toxic environment is a convenient variable. A variable that absorbs their deficits, balances their equations, and asks for nothing in return. I had let myself become an instrument for their comfort. But taking back your power isn't just about cutting off the funds. It's about redefining your own worth. This is a letter to anyone out there who feels like they are standing on the edge of their own life, watching someone else spend their energy, their time, and their peace of mind. I've come to realize that so many of us live our lives waiting for permission to set boundaries. You are not required to set yourself on fire just to keep other people warm. You are not obligated to be the shock absorber for someone else's dysfunction. If you are constantly pouring into a cup that has a hole in the bottom, the answer isn't to pour faster. The answer is to put the pitcher down and walk away. You might feel like you are betraying them by walking away, but the truth is, staying in an environment that constantly degrades you is the ultimate betrayal of yourself. Healing begins the moment you stop accepting the bare minimum as a substitute for respect. It begins when you realize that your peace is worth more than their comfort. Forgiveness isn't always for the other person. Sometimes it's the only way to set yourself free. But forgiveness does not mean reconciliation. And it certainly does not mean allowing them back into your ledger. I look back at the woman who used to quietly pay those bills, hoping it would make them love her, and I feel a deep wave of compassion for her. She didn't know her own strength. But the woman standing here today knows exactly what she is worth, and her price is no longer negotiable. I forgave myself for the years I stayed, for the money I lost, and for believing I had to buy my way into a family. I reclaimed my autonomy, not out of malice, but out of a profound, unshakable respect for my own future. My life is quiet now. It is predictable, disciplined, and entirely my own. The math finally adds up. If this story gave you the push you needed to reclaim your own life, please share it. You never know whose life you might change. See you in the next one.